Well, I'm ready when you guys are.
We're recording.
All right. So our chapter today is chapter 8 on it. It's titled Assessment Result Feedback Standards, Reference, Grading, and Reporting. Our team members are Juliana, Jessica, Hector, and Sonia. Next slide. In my section of the chapter, I'm going to begin with this title called Good Feedback is at the Heart of Good Pedagogy. And this just highlighting some chapter highlights that I thought were important. So one of the things that the chapter began with is how do we place a value on teaching and learning when it merges with evaluation? When is grading appropriate and not? So what the introduction highlighted, these are some important points that I thought were important to talk about. And the first one is seminal research on formative assessment concluded that grades are not as effective as feedback, and in some cases counterproductive. Comments specifically tailored to students have more of a positive impact on their learning and can thus improve their achievement. Black and William, their researchers, they claimed, which is backed by evidence from their meta-analysis, is that good feedback is the heart of good pedagogy, which signifies the quality of feedback is of critical importance. And then offering feedback is a complex process as it entails teachers to attending to an individualistic student performance, appraising the student's output against some reference, identifying the student's strengths and weaknesses, and responding to individual students. This chapter also highlights how standardized reference feedback, grading, and reporting can be designed to reflect the accomplishments of students, not just their failings. So learning through digitized this can be done through learning through digitized assessment portfolios. And this is a quote that I found really impactful. Ultimately, educational equity can be sustained if we as educators believe in the potential of our schools as change agents and judge students on their individual merits rather than on numbers or letters. Next slide, please. So the next slide, please. So there are 4 points that I'm going to be talking about today. The first one is the issue of grading. Next slide. So this topic talks about 3 things. So the first one's grading tends to perpetuate inequity. The second is normative feedback, and the third is weighing in on grading versus feedback. So grading tends to perpetuate inequity, basically means that we have to rethink our grading, and we have to think of it as being a powerful lever for strengthening equity in every facet of teaching and learning. And what normative feedback is, it defeats the intent of improving learning. So we see as assessments as something that is normal, which can be counterproductive in education and how we assess students. And on the third point, weighing in on grading versus feedback, assessment for learning is often viewed as student-centered and teacher-directed feedback, gearing to improve teaching and learning. Where do you or your team stand on the issue? So that's just a rhetorical question that I thought we can all think about, is like, where do we stand as educators on our view of grading and the impact it has on student learning and outcomes? Next slide, please. To grade or not to grade. So the compatibility of grading with assessment as and for learning. So this section really talks about a dividing line on the issue of student grading. There are those who believe that it is antithetical to the idea of assessment for learning. And on the opposite corner are those who believe that grading is a form of feedback for students. So it just talks about 2 different perspectives on how people view grading and assessment in classrooms. Teachers can hone in their expertise to produce instructional assessments and have expectations about what each student should be capable of producing. So this just says that teachers are perfectly capable of knowing what types of assessment to give their students because of their level of experience and knowing who their students are and what their potential and capabilities are in the classroom. And so some of these things they use are, grade level standards like Common Core and GSS science standards and rubrics. So teachers also consider the influence of students' academic language use on the expression of their content knowledge and to separate language proficiency and achievement from other classroom expectations. So it's not just what a student is learning content-wise, but it's also the use of their language expression and their language proficiency that should also be evaluated in the class. So when grading is more accurate and equitable, students feel empowered with more control over their outcomes. Grading should reflect growth in language development and academic progress. Next slide, please. So it's just a reflection that I found kind of really useful in my section is determining what counts in grading. So these are like typical classroom activities that can generate data from assessment as and for learning. So the first one is you can use our learning logs. The second, anecdotal notes from teacher observations, oral questioning by peers or teachers, think alouds, graphic organizers such as semantic webs or Venn diagrams, and interactive journals. Next slide, please. Setting learning goals to anchor grading practices. So every student should have individual learning goals. Content goals should be derived from high academic standards, such as college and career readiness standards. Because every student is an individual, we know that certain assessments are not made or meant to fit the individualistic student. They're made to fit a population, not individuals. So while goals for language learning should be based on language proficiency and development standards and language targets. So I wrote down two different examples. One is a content goal and the second one's a language goal. The first one is just an example that I found in the book. I will research controversial topics, state my opinions or claims, and identify evidence to match my opinions or claims. In a language goal, I will practice forming opinions and using persuasive language in oral and written arguments. So these two learning goals are something that is spoken before you begin teaching. So before I start teaching a lesson, I will remind and ask my students to read aloud the content goal. That's specific to what they're learning, and language goal is specific to how they will comprehend what they're learning through the content goal. The information from learning goals helps determine the criteria for grading. So grading has to be communicated with students at the beginning of each marking. Like they have to know what's expected of them, so they know what kind of work they're expected to produce. Grading is more evaluative than assessment, as it relies on interpretation of data. Other factors outside of academics are taken into account in determining a grade, such as effort, motivation, and timeliness. So this speaks about not just grading as just by the work. Yes, the work says a lot about what they're learning and what they have not learning, but this talks about a holistic approach to grading. Next slide, please. So giving grades to English language learners, like ELLs by definition have not reached academic parity in English with their English proficient peers. Due to the increasing number of diverse students, teachers need to carefully re-examine how they make judgments about student performance and provide feedback to students. As teachers, we should think about the factors that influence our grading practices and what we would want to communicate to students about their language learning. Next slide.
And this is my section, and it just went into talking about the dilemma of grading English language learners. And so the question that started by like asking the reader was, should the same criteria be used for grading ELLs who are at the beginning of stages of their English language development as those who are at language proficiency level 5? So it's just basically saying, should we use the same grading method for ELLs who are barely starting to learn English versus like English native speakers who are already just familiar with that language and are obviously at much higher levels than ELLs. And it was just basically saying that there's a heavy focus on differentiation in the classroom, especially like in the areas of instruction and assessment. So according to like ELL feedback and how they're doing, you'll fix your like curriculum content area, but it doesn't apply to grading. So what the text is asking for like teachers to do is that instead of doing that what should be done is evaluating ELL's performance in English should be in relation to descriptors or criteria specific to their language proficiency levels, so that grading shouldn't be done by numbers and letters, but rather descriptors. And I think I said that descriptors were performance definitions for speaking and writing. Thank you. And then it said to consider this grading scheme. So it's talking about using stuff such as performance assessment, which is like what students are able to demonstrate that they learn through like tasks or projects or anything like presentations or portfolios that they were able to show. And then it also talked about allowing the students to self-assess. And basically with that, they were just saying that the older students are, they take on more responsibility of like them receiving the grade they receive. So then that's more likely to encourage them to do homework or to try their best in school. And then it just says teacher made tests, such as using traditional and newer digital formats to reflect standards that have been addressed during instruction. And then it went into the criteria for grading in a standard referenced world, and there's 4 of them. The first criteria I talked about was product criteria, and it was just saying that it focuses on what students produce as an artifact of their learning. So I had mentioned like the portfolios and stuff. This was also kind of similar with allowing them to do it through debate, reenactment, reports, and presentations. And then there's process criteria, and basically teachers who don't think that product criteria, so the portfolios and reports, are sufficient enough, they'll also take into consideration process criteria, which is like the students' accountability, efforts, and work habits in the classroom. So they grade them based off of like classroom quizzes, homework, punctuality, and participation. And there's also performance criteria, which is stated that it's necessary for ELLs. And that was just basically like an ELL's language proficiency level is like their starting place for measuring growth in language development. So where they start, and then usually where they end, they'll just grade that measuring growth instead of like content wise, it's just language wise. And then progress criteria, it says that teachers use progress criteria to help determine academic growth. So content wise, examining where students began their journey and how they move forward. And that says that the criteria for this is individualized because students are going to start at different points, so that the expectations vary. So there's not really an example to give for that. And then mine just ended with a report card for dual language learners. And this was just saying how it basically focuses on academic achievement as well as language development. And they'll grade them on their English as well as their native language, which in this case or most cases would be Spanish.
So this is my section, and we talk about the can-do descriptors, and they pretty much are tasks based on examples of what ELLs can do linguistically at a given level of language proficiency. They serve as a resource that works in tandem with reopening scores on language proficiency measures, a tool for the collaboration of content and language teachers in planning differentiated classroom assessments and language instructions. In 2016, the can-do descriptors were reorganized around key uses of an academic language, which is discuss, explain, argue, and recount. Which leads me to the portfolios that are another resource for maintaining long-term records of students' growth and achievement. So the next one is using portfolios for an assessment and grades. And they are representations of students' accomplishments in schools. There's different kinds of portfolios, like showcase portfolios of their best work, pivotal portfolios of most important work, and collections of work samples, to name a couple. They all serve a different purpose. When assessment portfolios are part of a grading scheme in the classroom, schools, or a district, there has to be a procedure necessary to ensure their care, maintenance, and reliability. Teachers using this criterion in evaluating students' work and rely on common instructional products as an anchor and potential usefulness of a portfolio expansion. It also offers information that can be stored and maintained, which contains evidence of students' progress and accomplishments, which is a big deal when you have students moving from district to district or within the district. Oh, that first one's out there. Okay. So student assessment portfolios data is helpful for teachers who have students who are, that one's missing, being considered for pre-referral to special education, grading elementary school or high school, being considered for gifted or talented services, transitioning from language or academic support services, and transferring schools within a district. Oh, and moving from one grade to the next. Continuing with the portfolios. So assessment portfolios should represent standard curriculum and the language of instruction in proportion to their use. They are thoughtfully organized. They should be thoughtfully organized so that their continuity for making a period for basically they should be kept organized, so when you put stuff into it periodically, it just makes sense and it's articulated throughout the years of their schooling. Portfolios should be designed to simultaneously capture ELL's language proficiency and academic achievement through performance assessments and show that they're learning in a student's home language and or English, interdependence between oral language and literacy development, integrating of language and content in student work, higher level thinking through extended tasks and projects, multiliteracies including the use of technology and multimedia, and students' personal reflections and self-assessments. With that, it is important that they are thoughtfully organized so that they're continuing. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So that, then we go to grading. So they should be dated with a student summary sheet, with also students' characteristics, the teacher and student goals, college and career readiness, standards and language proficiency, development of standards that have been addressed in the list of content with scores if there is any, introduction including purposes and audience by the student, original samples of students' work if that is written or oral. It's preferred to have both, and they should be referenced to standards with accompanying rubrics or constructive narrative feedback. entries that demonstrate student multiliteracies, quizzes and tests are if needed or warranted, peer and student self-assessments or reflection on the collective body of work. So then we have reporting student progress in the conference portfolio, and some guidelines and policies regarding the portfolio should fall with the purview of school-wide professional learning communities. Teachers should have a management plan for portfolios that have addresses to quantity of how many entries there is, quality, which includes a rubric or any documentation forms appropriate for this, timing when the entries are to be submitted, and presentation, which means how to organize the contents, which also can be done chronological order, content area, or language. And then we go to the next person.
Okay, so this next section was mine, and it basically discussed conferences, reflection, and like career and college readiness. So for this first slide, I mainly focus on student-teacher conferences, and two things I first stumbled across was the discussion of mid to high levels of English language proficiency and low levels of English language proficiency. And for mid to high levels of English language proficiency, it allows to conduct student-led conferences in another language or English when there is instruction. And having instruction is pretty crucial, because without it, I mean, your ELs would probably be all over the place. And for low level English language proficiency, it should be guided in some sort by the teacher. So some key questions should also be like included in order to mold the foundation of the conferences, just so like every conference needs that question or that one main thing they're going to focus on. And so from the book, I got a scenario, and it said, show me your best work. Tell me why you chose this piece. What did you learn from doing it? Let's look at your goals this marking period. What grade do you think you should get? Why? Show me the evidence that is the grade you deserve. And it just, those are really good questions. I mean, it just draws your students to really think like and analyze like what they have done as a student in the classroom, which is good. And it also increases individualized instruction and strengthen the connection between the teacher and the student. So to continue on conferences, effective student-teacher conferences with families consists of students have multiple opportunities to reflect on and present their work in class. There are clear agendas and structures. Teachers help each student prepare for the conference. Students show evidence for learning and meeting learning targets. Student portfolios anchor the conference. Students set goals. Students accomplish outside school. Accomplishments outside school are acknowledged, and school leaders support like the effort that is being put in. And then the book gave, in my section, there was a little bit of like the figures of the examples they gave off, and I liked this one. I don't know why it just stood out to me, and it was just the standardized reference assessment portfolio, and it just discusses focuses on language proficiency and academic content standards. And I like when I went through each one of them, like they addresses standards, approaches standards, and attains standards. When I went through each one, and I like compared and contrast like what's the differences and how what like separates each one. And a lot of it just comes with that proficiency and like that level that is being produced, like the type of outcome which will land you in either 1, 2, or 3. So I really like the figure this section talked about. And then towards the end of the section, it talked about graduation portfolios and final reaction and reflection. And for great graduation portfolios, it mentioned how they are re-emerging as a mark of college and career readiness, which is, yeah, this is true because I remember like my senior year and throughout high school, I think maybe starting my sophomore year, every time we had conferences, we started like my sophomore year, we started this portfolio where we put like what we want to do in the future, where we want to go, and like some goals we have and what we have, like what we want to achieve in high school and beyond high school. And I kind of saw a little connection with this. So it is kind of cool to see that. And then it displays students' academic, technical, and dispositional understandings. These portfolios can include anything from research essays and reports, presentations, and more. So just basically things that some like just big assignments that really display your critical thinking and other like tools and tangibles that you have like developed and learned throughout all your school years. So for final reaction and reflection, it discussed how standards have assisted teachers in guidance and identifying learning targets for their units. Guiding our students is so they can reach their potential is crucial. By doing so, this includes honor bilingualism and multiculturalism. Agree that language varieties are integral to individuals' identities and their social cultural interactions with others, and accept the use of languages for academic purposes as a grounding for assessments as for and of learning.
I guess I'll explain it. And then the activity we have is just you click on the Padlet link and then, yeah, you can click it. And then it'll take you to this. And then we just have a question, which is what's your personal opinion on grading ELLs? And then we'll just have you like write your own and then you can link to other responses.
Other than that, I think we're good.